Hi, welcome to Stories of Art. My name is Carel Huydecoper and today I'd like to tell you the story of Perseus and how you can find it in art, mostly from the Renaissance onwards. And I've told you the story of Danae a while ago, Danae, his mother. If you're not familiar with the story yet, you can see it in a video. I have one up here and I'll post a link to it on the end, at the end of this video as well, so you can check it out there. Anyway, she had been a princess and had been seduced or well, at least impregnated by Zeus. He disguised himself as a shower of gold. And she had gotten a son, Perseus, but her father, his grandfather, then locked him up in a chest and chucked him out to sea, so they would drown. Why? Well, watch the other video. And they ended up on the island of Seriphos, another Greek island, and there was a king there, Polydectes, and Danae and Perseus, they settled there, lived there apparently for a while, because by the time that Perseus was a young man, a young adult, Polydectes started to woo Danae. He asked her to marry him and she refused. And then he decided that he needed to get rid of Perseus because he thought that it was her son that stood in the way of their love, of Danae's and Polydectes' love. So what he did is he came up with a ruse. He claimed to have asked Hippodamia to marry him. Hippodamia was a princess of another kingdom, and that required every man on the island to give the king a horse so that they would have a bride gift for the father of Hippodamia, which, by the way, means the tamer of horses. Strange sort of name, I would say. Now, Perseus was poor and he didn't have a horse, and so he went up to the king and he said, "Sorry, I don't have a horse, but I can give you something else. Ask me for anything and I'll give it to you." And that happened to be the trick that he was going for. So Polydectes then asked of Perseus the head of Medusa. Now, Medusa was a gorgon and quite deadly. There are three gorgons, or there were three gorgons, three sisters, and they were hideous, they were monstrous. And combinations of various horrible animals. And Medusa actually was a woman with, instead of hair, she had snakes, poisonous, venomous snakes. According to one of the old stories, she started out as a very beautiful young woman, wooed by everyone, and finally Poseidon fell in love with her. And when she was in the temple of Athena, he jumped her and raped her. And that enraged Athena, but strangely enough, not to Poseidon, but to her. So in a, I guess, classic blaming the victim sort of way, she turned Medusa into a monstrous being, so ugly and so hideous that if you looked her in the eye, you would turn to stone. Now that gorgon, Medusa, the only one of the three gorgons that was actually mortal, he had to find and decapitate and bring the head back to Polydectes. Now, Perseus was a hero, so all he did was he just went merrily on his way looking for gorgons to kill. And while he was looking for a way to do that, he encountered a tall woman and a man. And this was Athena and Hermes, or Minerva and Mercury, if you prefer the Roman names. And they had been sent by Zeus, because Zeus, of course, wanted to look after his son. And they gave him a bunch of gifts, or they lent him some stuff. Hermes gave him some sandals with wings so he could fly. He also gave him his sword that would never miss. In some tellings of the story, it's a sickle, by the way, instead of a sword. And he got an impenetrable sack, so basically a bag that couldn't break. doesn't sound like the best thing to get, but it turned out to be pretty useful. Athena gave him her shield, and they had brought him a cap from Hades. Hades could wear a cap and that made him invisible. And so he basically had an invisibility cloak. They also told him which way to go. He had to go north, far north to the Graiae. The Graiae, they are actually sisters of the Gorgons. 3 of them, also hideous creatures. In this version by Edward Burne-Jones, they're not that hideous, but they are 3 hideous old crones that share one eye and one tooth. And in order for them all to be able to see, they pass it from one to the other. So whenever one of them has to either see or chew something, they get the eye and tooth from the others. Now Perseus, of course, was invisible, and that helps. So he snuck up on them, and while they passed the eye from one to the next, he grabbed it. And by grabbing it, he could then keep their sight in his hand and blackmailed them into telling him where the Gorgons lived. And they told him that they lived south of Ethiopia. And Ethiopia was one of the places that is usually used in Greek mythology as a term for the land far, far away. It was further south than they had real knowledge of. And so Ethiopia is just a long way away. And it was even beyond that, and he had to get there. Well, it's not really a problem because he had these winged sandals. So he just flew out there, went south and further south. And at some point he remembered that if you look a Gorgon in the eye, you turn to stone. So instead of actually looking for them on the ground, he started to fly upside down and using the shield of Athena as a mirror. So just looking into that mirror, he could scan the ground and he could find the Gorgons. And he did. He found their caves and went in and found Medusa. And this is where his sword or sickle came in very handy because, of course, he just had to swing it and it never missed. So he chopped off the poor girl's head. This woke up the other 2 sisters. So he quickly grabbed the head, put it in a sack, his unbreakable, unpenetrable sack, and he got out of there. Now when he cut off her head, her blood came out, and the blood mixed with some water, and then suddenly 2 figures came out. One golden soldier and a winged horse called Pegasus. I assume actually that Perseus gave him that name because how would he otherwise have known? But anyway, he took the horse and jumped on it, and they fled away from this golden soldier that tried to kill them. Then he went on his merry way home with the head of Medusa. Now on his way home he passed Ethiopia, and there was a king, and he was married to Cassiopeia. Cassiopeia had done something very, very stupid. She had insulted the Nereids, and whatever you do in life, please always remember to avoid insulting the Nereids, because if you do that, they'll get angry, Poseidon will get angry, and he will set loose one of his horrible creatures, which he did. And he sent forth Cetus, or Cetos, and that was a big monster that started to terrorize the coastline of Ethiopia. He caused floods, he ate people, and it was unpleasant all around. Then the king and Cassiopeia were told that the only way to stop all of this was to sacrifice their daughter to him. Their daughter was called Andromeda. So then Andromeda was chained to a rock on the coast so that Cetus could see it, and when he arrived he would then eat her probably. But while she was chained up there and the monster came closer and closer to actually eating her, suddenly Perseus appeared, and he just saw this beautiful young lady chained to a rock and a monster about to eat her. So he decided to intervene. He swooped down and started hitting it with his sword. To no avail. Cetus was too strong, he couldn't kill it. And then he just pulled the head of Medusa from the sack, looked away and held it in front of the dragon. It turned to stone and it sank. So then he freed Andromeda, who happened to fall in love with him immediately, and they decided to get married and lived happily ever after. And during their wedding, which was held immediately, suddenly another man showed up called Phineus, and Phineus had actually been engaged to Andromeda before all this drama happened. And when she was about to be sacrificed to a sea monster, he had wisely decided not to intervene and just back off. But now that she'd been saved, he wanted her back. He also could see that Perseus was a big, strong man, and so instead of confronting him by himself, he brought a bunch of friends, and they tried to kill Perseus. And Perseus fought them off until he couldn't anymore, and then he again pulled the head of Medusa from the sack and turned them all to stone. Which is what you can see in this lovely painting by Luca Giordano. So when all of that was done, Andromeda and Perseus just went off back home, back to his home, so he could give the head of Medusa to Polydectes. Remember, that's how this whole thing got started. But by the time they got home, the trick of Polydectes had come out that he wasn't engaged to some other lady at all. He just wanted to trick Perseus into giving him something he couldn't give. And so Perseus wasn't going to give this head to him anyway. By that time, the gods appeared again. They wanted all their stuff back, and in the end, Athena received the head of Medusa and she put it on her shield. That's why she has a Gorgon's head on her shield. Now, one of the many ways in which you see Perseus depicted is holding the head of Medusa. One of the most famous examples, of course, is this one by Benvenuto Cellini, made in about 1556, and he's holding this head out. You can see he's standing on the body of Medusa, and he's careful to look away because, of course, that's pretty dangerous to do. And there's another famous version, and that's the one by Canova. I say the one, actually there's two of them. There's two versions he made, but they're pretty much identical. One is in the Vatican Museum, the Vatican, and the other is in the Metropolitan Museum in New York. The one in the Vatican was made first in the 1790s, and it was made to replace the Apollo Belvedere because Napoleon had stolen it and taken it to France because he wanted to build this enormous museum with all the greatest works of art in the world all put together. But he did feel at some point that he needed to sort of replace it, so he offered to replace it with something modern, and that was this sculpture by Canova. And always when I look at this sculpture, I wonder if the joke was intentional. Let me explain. There are several influences, several sources that Canova used to make his sculpture. Of course, he sort of copied the shape of it, the general sort of shape of the Apollo Belvedere, but made a different sculpture with a different story. And he combined a couple of things because Perseus holds a sword, but also a sickle. It's sort of a combination of sword and sickle. And where would he have gotten that? Well, actually, you've probably heard of Pompeii. Pompeii, the town that had been destroyed when Vesuvius exploded in the year 1709. Well, it wasn't the only town that was destroyed. There were several others, and one of them is Stabia. Stabia had some wonderful villas and was being dug up at the time. And they had found a number of beautiful frescoes in there, and this is one of them. And you can see that the inspiration for the Perseus of Canova, where he got the idea, it is so much alike, especially if you see it in this angle. You can see that you can see that the inspiration is pretty clear. And what he's doing, of course, it's Perseus in triumph. He's holding up the head of Medusa, probably killing one of his enemies. But he also does something very uncareful. He actually looks at her face and he turns to stone. Because, of course, it's a stone sculpture. Would Canova have actually made the joke that Perseus accidentally turned himself into a sculpture? So that's the joke. I don't know if it was intentional or not. But it is there. Now, of course, that's the way that we're used to seeing Perseus, as a strapping young man, strong with a sword and the head of Medusa in triumph. This hero that had to fight a monster and decided to do it in the nude. And he and Andromeda actually, of course, they got married. They went back to Greece. They founded various cities and lived happily ever after. Had lots of children and were the forefathers of all the Persian kings. That's the story anyway. But that's stories for other times, and I hope you liked this video. If you did, please press the like button, and this would also be a good time, if you haven't already, to subscribe to my channel. You can do that by clicking the button underneath this video, and when you do, there's this little bell that appears, an icon, and if you press that as well, you get notified anytime I post a new video. Now, I'd like to thank you very much for listening, and thanks for watching, and I hope to see you soon again. Bye.